The massive crystalline dome of the Galactic Council stretched impossibly high above the assembled delegates, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of the swirling nebula beyond. Ambassador Zethkar of the Dominion Empire stood at the central podium, his serpentine form coiled in a display of barely contained power. His scales shimmered with an opalescent blue-green that marked him as one of the most feared negotiators in known space. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections. The insectoid Vex clicked their mandibles in approval, their compound eyes reflecting the ambient light like tiny mirrors. The gaseous ethereals floated in their containment suits, their forms shifting and pulsing with each thought. The crystalline resonance hummed in harmonic frequencies that translated their emotions directly into the chamber's atmosphere. For 3 solar cycles, these negotiations had dragged on. The treaty in question would determine mining rights to the resource-rich Kepler Belt, a region containing enough rare minerals to power a dozen civilizations for millennia. Zethkar had systematically bullied, threatened, and intimidated every delegation into submission. His species, the Saurians, controlled the largest military fleet in this sector of the galaxy, and he wielded that fact like a weapon. The Dominion's proposal remains unchanged. Zethkar's voice resonated through the chamber's translation matrix, reaching every being present in their native language. 70% of all extracted resources go to the Empire. The remaining 30% will be divided among the rest of you based on your contributions to galactic stability. The Vex delegation leader, Hive Speaker Zikth, raised one of her 4 arms tentatively. Honored Ambassador, surely a more equitable distribution could be silence. The single word from Zethkar carried such menace that several species representatives physically recoiled. The Vex Collective has contributed nothing but cheap labor and inferior technology to this alliance. You will accept what is offered, or you will receive nothing at all. Zikth's antennae drooped in defeat. Around the chamber, other delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was how every session had gone. Zethkar would make his demands, crush any opposition with threats or humiliation, and the smaller species would capitulate. The ethereal representative, Mistwalker Velhan, attempted to float closer to the podium, their form becoming more solid as they focused their energy. Ambassador Zethkar, the ethereal collective has projected the long-term consequences of such an unbalanced treaty. The economic strain will— Your projections are irrelevant, Zethkar interrupted, his head swaying hypnotically as he spoke. The Dominion does not concern itself with the financial hardships of lesser species. Adapt or perish, it is the way of the universe. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Velhan's form became more diffuse, a clear sign of distress among their kind. The other delegates looked away, unable or unwilling to meet the ethereal's gaze. This pattern had become sickeningly familiar. Species after species had tried to reason with Zethkar, only to be dismissed, threatened, or publicly humiliated. The crystalline resonance had attempted to appeal through harmonic logic, but Zethkar had activated a sonic disruptor that left them writhing in pain for hours. The aquatic depths dwellers had offered historical precedent for fair resource distribution, only to have Zethkar describe in graphic detail how easily Dominion warships could boil their water worlds. The ambassador's tactics were brutally effective. He didn't just negotiate, he dominated. Every gesture, every word was calculated to reinforce the power dynamic. When he spoke, his massive frame seemed to grow larger, casting shadows over smaller delegates. When others tried to speak, he would coil and uncoil in a rhythm that was deeply unsettling to most species, a predatory behavior that triggered instinctual fear responses. In the observer gallery, journalists from various worlds documented the proceedings with growing despair. This treaty would essentially legalize the Dominion's stranglehold on galactic commerce. Smaller civilizations would become vassals in all but name, forced to trade their independence for scraps from the Empire's table. Sector Representative Klondar of the Metalworkers Guild stood slowly, his cybernetic enhancements whirring softly as they adjusted to support his weight. Ambassador, the Guild has concerns about the proposed enforcement mechanisms. Who will ensure? The Dominion fleet will ensure compliance. Zethkar cut him off, his eyes glowing with an inner fire that was visible even to species with limited visual spectrums. Question our methods again, and your foundries will experience firsthand the efficiency of our enforcement protocols. Klondar's metallic skin actually changed color, shifting from silver to a dull gray that indicated system shutdown due to stress overload. He sat down without another word, his internal mechanisms making small clicking sounds as they recalibrated. The silence that followed was deafening. 46 species, representing billions of sapient beings, sat in collective defeat. They all knew what would happen next. Zethkar would call for a vote, and fear would drive them to accept his terms. The Dominion would tighten its grip on the galaxy, and freedom would become an increasingly rare commodity. It was then that the chamber doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. The new arrival was unlike any being most of the delegates had seen before. Bipedal. About average height compared to the galactic median, with pale skin and an unusual patch of dark fur covering only the top of their head. They wore simple clothing that seemed almost primitive compared to the elaborate garments and technological augmentations displayed by other species. But what was most striking was their demeanor. While every other delegate in the chamber showed signs of submission, fear, or defeat, this being walked with steady, confident steps. Their spine was straight, their head held high, and their eyes, their remarkable binocular eyes, scanned the assembly with what could only be described as assessment rather than intimidation. "I believe this is the human delegation," announced the chamber's AI in its neutral, synthesized voice. Earth Representative Captain Sarah Chen. A ripple of confusion passed through the assembly. Humans were a newly contacted species, barely 50 years into galactic society. They had no significant military, no advanced technology, no economic leverage. What were they even doing here? Zethkar's head turned toward the newcomer, his serpentine neck extending as he studied this unexpected interruption. "Human," he said, the translation matrix somehow managing to convey the disdain in his voice. "Your species was not invited to these proceedings. This treaty concerns civilizations of importance." Captain Chen walked calmly to the human-designated area, a small section near the back that had remained empty until now. She placed a simple leather briefcase on the desk and turned to face Zethkar directly. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the chamber despite its relatively quiet tone. "Ambassador Zethkar," she said, pronouncing his name with perfect accuracy despite the complex clicking and hissing sounds involved. "My species may be new to galactic politics, but we're not new to recognizing bullies." The chamber fell into absolute silence. Even the ever-present hum of life support systems seemed to fade away. No one had spoken to the Dominion ambassador like that in living memory. Zethkar's scales shifted from blue-green to a deep crimson, a color that every species in the chamber recognized as a warning display. His massive form rose to its full height, casting a shadow that seemed to darken half the room. "Did this mammal just insult the Dominion Empire?" His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. But the translation matrix amplified it to ensure every being present could hear the threat contained within. "I stated a fact," Chen replied, her tone remaining steady and conversational. "You've spent 3 days threatening, intimidating, and humiliating representatives of dozens of species. Where I come from, We have a word for beings who use fear to get what they want from others who can't fight back." The implications of her words struck the assembly like a physical blow. Several delegates actually gasped, producing sounds unique to their species but universally understood as expressions of shock and terror. Zethkar's eyes began to glow brighter, and his coils shifted in patterns that suggested he was preparing for violence. "Your species' ignorance of galactic protocol will not protect you, human. The Dominion has destroyed civilizations for far lesser insults." "I'm sure you have," Chen said, opening her briefcase and removing a simple tablet device. "But before you make any threats you might regret, perhaps you should hear what I have to say about your proposal." The audacity of this statement left the chamber in stunned silence. A representative from a species that had barely discovered faster-than-light travel was not only standing up to the most feared diplomat in the galaxy, but suggesting they had something meaningful to contribute to negotiations that had been ongoing for 3 days. Other delegates began to shift in their seats, some leaning forward to get a better look at this apparently suicidal human. The Vex delegation's compound eyes were all focused on Chen, their antennae twitching with nervous energy. The ethereals had become almost completely solid, a sure sign of intense concentration and interest. Zethkar's form seemed to coil tighter, like a spring being compressed. "You dare to presume that your primitive species has anything of value to offer these proceedings?" "Oh, I don't presume anything," Chen replied, her fingers moving across her tablet's surface. "I know exactly what I'm bringing to this discussion. The question is whether you're intelligent enough to listen, or if you're going to keep relying on intimidation because it's the only tool in your arsenal." The insult was delivered so matter-of-factly that it took a moment for its full impact to register. When it did, Zethkar's reaction was immediate and terrifying. His massive form uncoiled and then snapped forward, bringing his face to within inches of Chen's position. His eyes blazed with fury, and his mouth opened to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. "I could kill you where you stand, human. Your pathetic species couldn't stop me if I decided to reduce your homeworld to ash." Chen looked up at the massive predator looming over her and smiled, an expression that confused many of the alien observers, but somehow managed to convey both amusement and complete fearlessness. "You probably could," she agreed cheerfully, "but then you'd have to explain to the Galactic Council why you murdered an unarmed diplomat during treaty negotiations. More importantly, you'd never learn what I know about the Kepler Belt resources that your survey teams missed." For the first time since the negotiations began, Zethkar appeared uncertain, his head pulled back slightly, and the glow in his eyes dimmed as confusion replaced rage. "What do you mean, missed?" Chen's smile widened, and she glanced around the chamber at the dozens of alien faces watching this unprecedented confrontation. "Oh, that's right. You don't know, do you? Your entire proposal is based on incomplete information." She turned to address the other delegates, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the chamber. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various other classifications, what if I told you that the Kepler Belt contains approximately 3 times the mineral wealth that the Dominion surveys indicate?" The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates erupted in chatter, clicks, hums, and various other forms of communication. The Vex began rapidly clicking their mandibles in what appeared to be excitement. The resonance harmonic frequencies created a complex symphony of curiosity and hope. Zethkar's scales had shifted to a mottled pattern of crimson and deep purple, indicating confusion and growing anger. Impossible. Dominion survey technology is the most advanced in the galaxy. For conventional mineral detection, sure, Chen agreed, consulting her tablet again. But you've been scanning for traditional elements. You missed something rather important. She touched a control on her device, and suddenly the chamber's main display screen activated, showing a three-dimensional model of the Kepler belt. Traditional mineral deposits were marked in various colors, matching what every species already knew about the region. "This is what everyone's been fighting over," Chen said, gesturing to the display. Approximately 47 billion tons of extractable resources, mostly common metals and standard fuel compounds. Then she touched another control, and the display changed dramatically. New markers appeared throughout the belt, so numerous that they transformed the sparse mining region into what looked like a treasure trove. "But this is what's actually there," Chen continued. 138 billion tons of extractable resources, including deposits of quantum-stable matter that your scans couldn't detect because your sensors aren't calibrated for trans-dimensional mineral formations. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates leaped to their feet, their various forms of excitement and agitation creating a cacophony that the translation matrix struggled to process. The economic implications were staggering. If the human was correct, they weren't negotiating over a valuable resource region. They were negotiating over the richest mineral deposit in galactic history. Zethkar stared at the display, his serpentine form swaying slightly as he processed the information. This cannot be accurate. If such deposits existed, we would have detected them." "Would you?" Chen asked, her tone now carrying a note of gentle education rather than confrontation. "Tell me, Ambassador, when was the last time the Dominion updated its survey technology? Your sensors are impressive for detecting three-dimensional mineral formations, but they're useless for resources that exist in quantum superposition." She manipulated the display again, showing cross-sections of the quantum-stable matter deposits. "These minerals exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. They're incredibly valuable because they can be used to create stable quantum computers, trans-dimensional communication arrays, and most importantly, faster-than-light drives that don't require exotic matter. The implications hit every species simultaneously. FTL travel currently required rare and expensive exotic matter that had to be harvested from the cores of dying stars. If quantum-stable matter could replace those requirements, it would revolutionize galactic transportation and communication. The ethereal representative, Velhan, floated closer to the display, their form solidifying as they focused intently on the data. "Human Chen, how did your species discover these deposits when our combined survey efforts failed to detect them?" Chen's expression became almost apologetic. "Because we've been looking for them specifically. You see, my species has a rather unique approach to resource exploration. We don't just scan for what we know exists. We scan for anomalies that might indicate something we don't know about yet." She walked closer to the display, pointing to specific areas where the quantum deposits were densest. "We call it curiosity-driven science. Instead of assuming we know everything about how minerals form and where they can be found, we investigate anything that doesn't match our expectations." Zethkar's scales had shifted again, now showing a pattern that indicated deep confusion mixed with growing alarm. "Even if your data is accurate, it changes nothing. The Dominion's military superiority remains absolute." "Does it?" Chen asked, turning back to face the ambassador. "Because I'm curious about something else too. Ambassador, how many ships do you currently have in this sector?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Zethkar's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "The disposition of Dominion forces is not your concern, human." "Oh, I think it is," Chen said cheerfully, consulting her tablet again. "Especially since there are currently 17 human ships in the outer system, and they've been monitoring Dominion fleet movements for the past week." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop even further. Every delegate turned to stare at Chen with expressions of disbelief. The humans were supposed to be a minor species with limited technology. How could they have ships operating in this heavily monitored system without being detected? Zethkar's form went completely rigid. That's impossible. Our sensors would have detected any approaching vessels. Would they? Chen asked, her tone still conversational but now carrying an undercurrent of something that made several delegates unconsciously lean away from her. Tell me, Ambassador, what's the maximum range of Dominion passive sensors? When Zethkar didn't immediately respond, Chen nodded as if his silence confirmed something. I thought so. Your sensors are calibrated for detecting ships using conventional FTL drives and traditional hull materials. They're quite good at that, actually, but they're not so good at detecting ships that don't use conventional technology. She touched her tablet, and the chamber's display changed again, now showing a tactical overview of the entire star system. 17 small icons appeared at the system's edge, clearly marked as human vessels. Our ships have been observing since before these negotiations began, Chen continued. We wanted to understand the political dynamics before we revealed ourselves. What we discovered was illuminating. Zethkar's massive form began to coil and uncoil rapidly, a clear sign of agitation. Human trickery will not— It's not trickery, Chen interrupted gently. It's just a different approach to technology. You see, Ambassador, your species has spent millennia perfecting the art of making things bigger, more powerful, more intimidating. My species took a different path. We focused on making things smarter. The other delegates were following this exchange with growing fascination and hope. For the first time in 3 days, they were witnessing someone not just stand up to the Dominion ambassador, but actually gain the upper hand in the confrontation. Chen walked back to her position, but instead of sitting down, she remained standing, her posture relaxed but confident. So here's what I propose, Ambassador. Instead of threatening everyone into accepting your terms, why don't we have an actual negotiation? One where every species gets a fair share of the resources and everyone benefits from the increased wealth. And if I refuse? Zethkar asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Chen's smile returned. But this time it carried a different quality, something that made even the largest predators in the chamber feel a chill of recognition. Then you'll have to explain to the Dominion High Command why you passed up the chance to secure access to the largest quantum-stable matter deposits in known space because you were too proud to negotiate with a species you considered inferior. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. For the first time since the negotiations began, Zethkar looked uncertain. The power dynamic in the chamber had shifted fundamentally, and everyone present could feel it. The human had done something that no other species had managed in living memory. She had made the Dominion ambassador doubt himself. The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a molecular blade. Ambassador Zethkar remained frozen in his coiled position, his serpentine mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Around him, the other delegates watched with barely contained excitement as they witnessed something unprecedented. The most feared diplomat in the galaxy was actually considering negotiation instead of domination. Captain Chen maintained her relaxed stance, but her eyes never left Zethkar's face. She had spent months studying Dominion psychology, and she knew this was the critical moment. Push too hard, and he would retreat into threats and violence. Don't push hard enough, and he would regain his composure and crush this opportunity. Of course, she said casually, if you'd prefer to maintain the status quo, that's certainly your choice. The 17 human ships currently in system will simply return to Earth with our survey data, and we'll develop the quantum-stable matter deposits ourselves. The words hit the chamber like a plasma torpedo. Every delegate understood the implications immediately. If humanity had the ability to extract and process quantum-stable matter independently, they could revolutionize galactic trade overnight. They could offer faster-than-light drives to any species willing to break free from Dominion control. Zethkar's scales shifted through several color patterns in rapid succession: confusion, anger, calculation, and finally, grudging respect. You're bluffing, human. Your species lacks the technology for quantum-stable matter extraction. Chen tilted her head slightly, an expression that somehow conveyed both curiosity and mild disappointment. Am I? Tell me, Ambassador, how exactly did you think we detected those deposits in the first place? We've been developing quantum resonance technology for decades. The extraction and processing techniques were the easy part once we figured out how to see what was there. She gestured toward her tablet, and the display changed again, showing detailed technical specifications for quantum-stable matter processing equipment. The designs were elegant, efficient, and completely unlike anything in the Dominion's technological database. Our approach is different from yours, Chen continued. Where you focus on brute force applications, we prefer elegant solutions. Quantum-stable matter extraction doesn't require massive mining platforms or enormous processing facilities. It requires precise calibration and careful handling, things my species happens to be very good at. The Vex delegation leader, Zixth, raised one of her 4 arms tentatively. For the first time in days, her antennae were pointing forward in a gesture of confidence rather than drooping in defeat. Captain Chen, if humans were to share this technology, what would you require in return? An excellent question, Chen replied, turning to address the full assembly. My species has a concept called mutual benefit. We believe that prosperity shared is prosperity multiplied. We're not interested in dominating galactic trade. We're interested in participating in it. Zethkar's head swayed hypnotically as he studied the human. And what, precisely, would this participation entail? Chen's expression became more serious, though not threatening. Equal representation in the Galactic Council, fair trade agreements that benefit all parties, and most importantly, an end to the practice of using military threats to resolve commercial disputes. The chamber erupted in excited chatter again. The smaller species had never dared to hope for such terms. Equal representation meant their voices would actually matter in galactic decisions. Fair trade meant they could develop their own economies instead of being forced into subservient roles. But it was Chen's final point that sent shockwaves through the assembly. She was essentially demanding that the Dominion abandon its primary tool of diplomacy. Zethkar's eyes blazed as he processed this demand. You ask the impossible, human. The Dominion's strength maintains order in the galaxy. Without our authority, there would be chaos. Would there? Chen asked, her tone genuinely curious. Or would there be competition? Innovation? Growth? Tell me, Ambassador, when was the last time any species developed a significant technological breakthrough under Dominion rule? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the chamber knew the answer. The Dominion actively suppressed technological development among client species, fearing that innovation might threaten their military superiority. Chen began walking slowly around the central area, addressing different delegations as she spoke. The Vex Collective could revolutionize biotechnology if they weren't restricted to basic manufacturing. The Ethereal's mastery of energy manipulation could solve the galactic power crisis if they weren't limited to operating atmospheric processors. The Resonance could create communication networks that span entire galactic arms if they weren't confined to local system monitoring. With each example, the delegates she mentioned sat up straighter, their various forms of body language indicating growing excitement and hope. And the aquatic depths dwellers, Chen continued, turning toward their section, could develop underwater cities on thousands of worlds if they weren't required to focus solely on food production for Dominion colonies. The lead aquatic representative, a being whose name roughly translated to current rider flowing deep, made a series of complex bubble patterns that the translation matrix interpreted as intense emotional agreement. Every species in this chamber has incredible potential, Chen said, returning to her position, but that potential has been deliberately suppressed to maintain the Dominion's position. What I'm proposing isn't just fair, it's profitable for everyone, including the Dominion. Zethkar's coils shifted into a tighter formation. Explain. Simple economics, Chen replied, activating her tablet again. The display showed a complex economic model of the galaxy's trade patterns. Currently, the Dominion extracts resources from client species and provides basic manufactured goods in return. It's a functional system, but it's incredibly inefficient. She manipulated the display to show alternative trade patterns. But imagine if each species was free to develop their natural advantages. The Vex become the galaxy's biotechnology center. The ethereals provide clean energy to every civilized world. The resonants create a communication network that enables instant commerce across vast distances. The economic projections that appeared on the display were staggering. Total galactic productivity increased by over 300%, and even the Dominion's share of this expanded economy was larger than their current total wealth. You see, Ambassador, when you suppress others to maintain your position, you limit not just their potential, but your own. The galaxy could be so much more than it currently is. Velhan, the ethereal representative, floated closer to the center of the chamber. Captain Chen, these projections assume peaceful cooperation between species with very different cultures and values. How would conflicts be resolved without a central authority? Another excellent question, Chen said, nodding approvingly. We propose a council-based system where disputes are resolved through mediation and economic pressure rather than military threats. Species that refuse to honor agreements would find themselves excluded from the trade networks until they reconsider. Zethkar's laugh was a harsh, grating sound that the translation matrix struggled to process. Naive human idealism. There are species in this galaxy that respond only to force. Are there? Chen asked. Or are there species that have never been offered anything other than force? Tell me, Ambassador, when was the last time the Dominion tried to resolve a conflict through negotiation before resorting to threats? The silence that followed answered the question more effectively than words ever could. Chen's expression became more sympathetic. I understand your perspective, Ambassador. Your species has been the galaxy's policeman for so long that you've forgotten there might be other ways to maintain order. But consider this. What happens when someone stronger than the Dominion comes along? Zethkar's form went rigid. There is no species stronger than the Dominion. Today, no, Chen agreed. But what about tomorrow? What about next century? Military superiority is always temporary, but economic partnerships, cultural exchange, mutual respect, those things create lasting bonds that are much stronger than fear. She gestured toward the display, which now showed a timeline of galactic history. Your own records show that every military empire eventually falls, usually when their oppressed subjects find a way to unite against them. But cooperative alliances can last for millennia. The implications of her words were clear to everyone in the chamber. The Dominion's current system contained the seeds of its own destruction. Eventually, the client species would find a way to overthrow their oppressors, and the cycle of violence would begin anew. Sector Representative Klondar of the Metalworkers Guild stood slowly, his cybernetic enhancements humming with renewed energy. Captain Chen, if the human proposal were to be implemented, what guarantees would exist to prevent any single species from attempting to recreate the current Dominion system? Transparency and interdependence, Chen replied without hesitation. Under our proposal, no single species would control enough resources to threaten the others. The Kepler Belt deposits would be developed by a consortium of all interested parties with shares determined by contribution rather than military strength. She touched her tablet, and the display showed a detailed breakdown of the proposed consortium structure. Each species had clearly defined roles based on their natural abilities and technological strengths. The Vex would provide biological contamination control and closed-system life support. The ethereals would handle energy distribution and storage. The resonance would manage communication and coordination. The Dominion would provide structural engineering and heavy construction capability. For the first time since the negotiations began, Zethkar saw his species listed as partners rather than rulers. The psychological impact was subtle but significant. Every species brings something unique to the table, Chen continued. And every species benefits from the success of the whole. If anyone tries to seize control, they lose access to capabilities they can't replicate themselves. The crystalline resonant representative, a being whose harmonic frequencies had been silent since Zethkar's earlier sonic attack, suddenly began producing a complex melody that the translation matrix identified as deep contemplation mixed with hope. The harmony is possible, the resonant communicated through synchronized vibrations. The frequencies align in ways that were previously unimaginable. This human speaks of combinations that resonate across all spectrums of possibility. Zethkar turned his massive head toward the resonant, his expression unreadable. The crystalline beings were renowned for their ability to analyze complex systems and predict long-term outcomes. If they were expressing optimism about Chen's proposal, it carried significant weight. Even if your proposal has merit, Zethkar said slowly, the Dominion High Command would never agree to such dramatic changes. Chen's smile returned, and this time it carried a note of genuine warmth. Would they? Let me ask you something, Ambassador. What do you think they'll say when you report that humanity has developed quantum-stable matter technology and is willing to share it freely with anyone who joins our alliance? The question hit Zethkar like a physical blow. He had been so focused on the immediate negotiation that he had almost forgotten about the larger political implications. If humanity could indeed extract and process quantum-stable matter, they represented the single greatest shift in galactic power dynamics in recorded history. You're suggesting the Dominion choose between adaptation and obsolescence, he said quietly. I'm suggesting the Dominion choose between partnership and isolation, Chen corrected. We're not trying to replace your empire, Ambassador. We're trying to evolve beyond the need for empires altogether. She gestured toward the other delegates, who were watching this exchange with rapt attention. Look around this chamber, Ambassador. Every species here has spent the last 3 days in fear. Fear of punishment, fear of economic ruin, fear of military retaliation. Is that really the legacy you want for your civilization? To be remembered as the species that ruled through terror? Zethkar's scales shifted through several patterns as he considered her words. The other delegates remained silent, sensing that this was the crucial moment that would determine the future of galactic civilization. What you're proposing, Zethkar said finally, would require the Dominion to abandon everything we've built over thousands of years. No, Chen replied softly. It would require you to build something better. The silence stretched on for long minutes. Finally, Zethkar's massive form began to uncoil slowly, a sign that his defensive posture was relaxing. Human Chen, he said, his voice carrying a tone that no one in the chamber had heard from him before. Uncertainty mixed with something that might have been curiosity. If the Dominion were to consider this proposal, what guarantees would we have of our continued security and prosperity? For the first time since entering the chamber, Chen's expression showed genuine enthusiasm. The same guarantees every other species would have, Ambassador. The guarantee that when everyone succeeds, everyone benefits. The guarantee that cooperation creates more security than domination ever could. And most importantly, the guarantee that your species' considerable abilities would be valued as contributions rather than feared as threats. She walked closer to the massive ambassador, showing no fear despite the fact that he could kill her in seconds. The Dominion has spent millennia proving how powerful you are. Imagine what you could accomplish if you spent the next millennium proving how valuable you are." Zethkar stared down at the small human who had somehow managed to fundamentally challenge everything his civilization stood for. Around the chamber, dozens of alien eyes watched as the most feared diplomat in the galaxy struggled with concepts that had never before been part of his worldview. "I will," he began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "I will need to consult with the High Command before any agreements can be finalized." "Of course," Chen agreed readily. "This is a big decision that affects everyone. Take all the time you need. But while you're consulting, perhaps the other delegates would like to hear more details about how the consortium would actually function." What followed was unlike any diplomatic session in galactic history. Instead of threats and ultimatums, the chamber filled with actual discussion. Species that had never been allowed to speak freely began sharing ideas and suggestions. The Vex proposed biological solutions to mining challenges. The Ethereals suggested energy distribution systems that could power entire star systems. The Resonants offered communication protocols that could coordinate complex operations across vast distances. For the first time in their memory, the smaller species were being treated as partners rather than subjects. And at the center of it all was the small human who had somehow managed to transform a chamber of fear into a workshop of possibilities. Zethkar watched this transformation with growing amazement. He had expected chaos when central authority was challenged. Instead, he was witnessing creativity and cooperation on a scale he had never imagined possible. As the session continued, a thought began forming in the ambassador's mind, a thought that would have been impossible just hours earlier. Perhaps the human was right. Perhaps there was a better way. The galaxy was about to change forever, and for the first time in millennia, that change was driven by hope instead of fear. 3 months later, the Galactic Council chambers had been transformed. Where once there had been rigid hierarchies and fearful whispers, now there was animated discussion and collaborative planning. The massive crystalline dome still offered its breathtaking view of the swirling nebula beyond, but the atmosphere within had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Hopeful. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the same podium where Ambassador Zethkar had once wielded fear like a weapon. But instead of facing a cowed and terrified audience, she looked out at delegates who sat forward in their seats, eager to participate in the ongoing transformation of galactic society. "The first quantum-stable matter extraction platform came online yesterday," she announced, consulting the same simple tablet she had used to change everything 3 months ago. "The initial output exceeded projections by 40%. And our Vex partners have confirmed that the biological contamination protocols are functioning perfectly." The Vex delegation leader, Zikith, clicked her mandibles in the complex pattern that indicated deep satisfaction. "The symbiotic organisms adapted to the quantum-stable environment faster than anticipated. We project that bioefficiency will continue to improve as the organisms evolve." From the energy management section, ethereal Velhan floated closer to the central discussion area. "The power distribution network is operating at optimal levels. The quantum stable matter provides energy density that makes traditional fusion reactors obsolete. We estimate that planetary power costs will decrease by 90% once the network is fully deployed." Around the chamber, similar reports came from every species involved in the consortium. The Resonants had created communication systems that allowed real-time coordination across interstellar distances. The Metalworkers Guild had developed construction techniques that took advantage of quantum-stable matter's unique properties. Even the traditionally conservative aquatic depths dwellers had contributed by designing underwater processing facilities that could operate in environments too dangerous for surface-based species. But the most remarkable change was in the Dominion delegation itself. Ambassador Zethkar still commanded respect through his presence, but it was respect earned through contribution rather than enforced through fear. His species' engineering expertise had proven crucial in designing the massive structural frameworks needed for the quantum-stable matter processing platforms. The Dominion had discovered that being valued for their abilities was far more satisfying than being feared for their weapons. "The High Command's latest report shows remarkable results," Zethkar announced. His serpentine form relaxed in a way that would have been impossible during his days of ruling through intimidation. "Dominion worlds are experiencing economic growth at rates not seen since the early expansion period. The transition from military expenditure to infrastructure investment has freed resources we didn't realize we possessed." Chen smiled at the massive ambassador, remembering the day he had returned from his consultations with the Dominion High Command. The discussion had apparently been heated, with many commanders arguing for a military response to humanity's challenge. But Zethkar had presented the economic projections, the technological advantages, and most importantly, the long-term strategic benefits of cooperation over domination. The deciding factor had been a simple question posed by the Supreme Commander herself. What happens to the Dominion when we encounter a species as militarily superior to us as we are to these others? The answer had led to the most dramatic policy shift in Dominion history. They had chosen evolution over stagnation, partnership over tyranny. "There have been some challenges," Zethkar continued, his scales showing the pattern that indicated mild embarrassment. "Several border worlds initially resisted the transition from military occupation to economic partnership. They required convincing that the new system would better serve their interests." "How did that convincing go?" asked current writer Flowing Deep, the aquatic representative. The question carried a note of concern, as everyone knew that Dominion convincing had historically involved devastating demonstrations of force. "We sent economic development teams instead of military enforcers," Zethkar replied, a statement that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "We offered infrastructure improvements, technology transfers, and participation in the galactic trade network. Resistance melted away faster than ice in a stellar core." The chamber erupted in the harmonious mix of sounds that had become the new signature of Galactic Council sessions. Clicks, hums, harmonic frequencies, and various other expressions of approval created a symphony of cooperation that replaced the old atmosphere of fearful silence. Chen walked around the podium to address the full assembly. "The success of the Kepler Belt project has exceeded everyone's expectations, but it's also revealed new possibilities we hadn't considered. The quantum-stable matter has properties that could revolutionize faster-than-light travel, interstellar communication, and even planetary engineering." She activated her tablet, and the main display showed technical specifications that made several delegates gasp in excitement. "Our research teams believe it may be possible to create stable wormhole networks using quantum-stable matter as an anchor medium. If successful, travel between any 2 points in the galaxy would take hours instead of weeks." The implications struck every delegate simultaneously. Instant galactic travel would eliminate the isolation that had historically kept species separate and suspicious. Cultural exchange would flourish. Economic opportunities would multiply exponentially. The galaxy would truly become a unified community for the first time in its history. Hive Speaker Zixth raised one of her 4 arms. "Captain Chen, what resources would be required for such a project?" "More than any single species could provide," Chen replied honestly, "but well within the capabilities of our combined civilizations working together. The Dominion would provide the heavy engineering. The ethereals would manage the massive energy requirements. The resonance would handle the precision calibration needed for stable wormhole generation. The Vex would ensure biological safety for travelers, and dozens of other species would contribute their unique expertise." "And humanity?" asked Sector Representative Klondar, his cybernetic enhancements humming with curiosity. Chen's expression became thoughtful. Humans would do what we've always done best. We'd ask the questions nobody else thinks to ask, look for solutions in places others haven't examined, and find ways to make the impossible merely difficult. The answer drew appreciative sounds from delegates throughout the chamber. Over the past 3 months, they had all witnessed humanity's unique approach to problem-solving. Where other species had spent millennia perfecting established techniques, humans had consistently found entirely new approaches that made existing limitations irrelevant. "There is another matter we must address," announced a new voice from the observer gallery. The speaker was Admiral Kethvar of the Dominion High Fleet, Zethkar's military counterpart, and someone who had initially been skeptical of the new cooperative approach. "Admiral," Chen acknowledged respectfully, "how can we help you?" Kethvar's massive form descended to the chamber floor via a transport platform designed to accommodate Dominion physiology. Like Zethkar, his presence once would have terrified the smaller species. Now, they regarded him with curiosity rather than fear. "3 weeks ago, our long-range sensors detected an approaching fleet," he announced, his words causing a ripple of concern throughout the chamber. "Unknown configuration, unknown technology, unknown intent. They will reach the outer territories within 6 months." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. First contact with unknown species was always dangerous, but during the old system, such situations had been handled through immediate military response. The approaching fleet would be met with overwhelming Dominion firepower and either destroyed or forced to surrender. "Do we know anything about their capabilities?" Chen asked, her tone remaining calm despite the potential threat. "Initial analysis suggests their technology is significant," Kethvar replied diplomatically. "Their ships are larger than Dominion dreadnoughts and appear to use propulsion systems we don't recognize." Zethkar's coils shifted into a defensive pattern. In the past, the Dominion would have assembled a war fleet and met this threat with maximum force. "And if that fleet proved superior to Dominion forces?" Chen asked quietly. The question hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. Everyone in the chamber understood the implication. The old system of military domination only worked when you were the strongest force in the galaxy. When something stronger came along, the only options were destruction or submission. "What do you propose, Captain?" Admiral Kethvar asked, and the fact that he was asking rather than declaring marked another fundamental shift in galactic politics. Chen activated her tablet and began working through calculations. "We do what no galactic civilization has ever done before. We approach them as partners instead of threats." The chamber erupted in concerned chatter. The idea of approaching an unknown military force without weapons ready was contrary to every instinct evolved species possessed. "Explain," Zethkar requested, his scales showing the pattern that indicated he was fighting his own defensive instincts. "Think about it from their perspective," Chen said, beginning to pace around the central area. "They're approaching a region of space controlled by dozens of different species working together. Instead of meeting them with a war fleet, we meet them with a diplomatic convoy that includes representatives from every major civilization." She gestured toward the diverse delegates around her. "We show them what cooperation can accomplish. We demonstrate that we're not a threat to be conquered or destroyed, but a community they might want to join." Current Rider Flowing Deep made a series of complex bubble patterns indicating deep concern. "And if they prove hostile despite our peaceful approach?" "Then we defend ourselves," Chen replied simply. "But we defend ourselves as a united galaxy instead of scattered species trying to resist conquest individually." The profound shift in thinking was almost overwhelming. Instead of the Dominion protecting client species in exchange for subservience, it would be a true alliance where every civilization contributed to mutual defense. "The quantum-stable matter technology could be crucial," added Ethereal Velhan, their form solidifying as they focused on the strategic implications. If we can complete the wormhole network before the unknown fleet arrives, we could coordinate defense across the entire galaxy instantly. Or, suggested resonant harmony speaker Crystal Song, their frequencies carrying notes of cautious optimism, we could use the network to demonstrate the benefits of joining our alliance rather than fighting it. Admiral Kethvar's expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested deep consideration. You're proposing that we replace military supremacy with economic attraction? I'm proposing that we replace fear with opportunity, Chen corrected. Any species capable of interstellar travel at that scale has already solved their basic survival needs. What they're probably looking for is growth, expansion, new experiences, new possibilities. She touched her tablet, and the display showed the economic projections for the Galactic Alliance over the next century. We can offer them something more valuable than conquered territory. We can offer them partnership in the most prosperous and technologically advanced civilization in galactic history. Zethkar studied the projections for long moments before speaking. And if they refuse our offer of partnership? Chen's expression became more serious. Then they'll face not just the Dominion fleet, but the combined military forces of 47 allied species using technology they've never encountered. Quantum-stable matter doesn't just revolutionize commerce, it revolutionizes warfare. The implications were clear to everyone present. The defensive capabilities of a truly united galaxy would be exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. Any aggressor would face not just superior numbers, but unprecedented coordination and technological advantages. The choice is theirs, Chen continued. Join the most successful alliance in galactic history, or try to fight a war against enemies who can communicate instantly across interstellar distances, move fleets through wormhole networks, and coordinate resources from thousands of worlds. Admiral Kethvar's scales shifted to a pattern indicating grudging admiration. You've essentially created a situation where cooperation is not just morally superior to conquest, it's strategically superior as well. That was always the goal, Chen replied. Violence should be the last resort when all else fails, not the first response when someone looks different from us. The session continued for several more hours, as delegates worked out the details of their approach to first contact with the unknown fleet. Representatives would be chosen from every major species. The diplomatic convoy would include ships equipped with translation matrices, cultural databases, and most importantly, demonstration models of quantum-stable matter technology. But perhaps the most significant decision was that the convoy would be led jointly by Captain Sarah Chen and Ambassador Zethkar, representing the partnership between humanity's innovative spirit and the Dominion's organizational expertise. As the session finally concluded and delegates began filing out to prepare for humanity's second great diplomatic challenge, Zethkar approached Chen privately. "Human," he said, his voice carrying a tone she had never heard from him before, something that might have been gratitude. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I would be looking forward to a negotiation instead of a battle, I would have considered them mentally defective. Chen smiled up at the massive ambassador. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be planning joint diplomatic missions with the most feared negotiator in the galaxy, I would have checked their mental health too. They stood together in the empty chamber, looking up at the swirling nebula beyond the crystalline dome. In the distance, barely visible as a glimmer of light, one of the quantum-stable matter processing platforms continued its work, transforming the impossible into the inevitable. "Do you think it will work?" Zethkar asked quietly. "This new approach to galactic civilization?" Chen considered the question seriously. "I think it's already working. The question is whether we can make it work well enough and fast enough to meet whatever challenges come next. And if the approaching fleet proves hostile despite our best efforts?" Chen's expression became determined. "Then we'll show them that a galaxy united is stronger than any force that tries to divide it. But first, We'll show them that a galaxy united is too good an opportunity to pass up. 6 months later, when the unknown fleet reached the outer territories, they were met not by weapons and threats, but by the most diverse diplomatic convoy in galactic history. Representatives from 47 species, traveling in ships powered by quantum-stable matter, carrying offers of partnership and demonstrations of what cooperation could achieve. The approaching fleet belonged to the Hegemony, a military coalition that had conquered 3 galaxy clusters through overwhelming force and ruthless efficiency. They had come expecting to find another collection of primitive civilizations ripe for conquest. Instead, they found something they had never encountered before, a unified galactic civilization that was militarily prepared for any threat, economically prosperous beyond their wildest dreams, and most importantly, genuinely eager to share both their success and their knowledge with anyone willing to join them. The negotiations took 3 weeks. In the end, the Hegemony didn't just agree to peaceful coexistence, they petitioned to join the Galactic Alliance. As Captain Sarah Chen and Ambassador Zeth Kar watched the former Hegemony ships integrate into alliance formations, they realized they had accomplished something that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. They had created a form of civilization so attractive that even dedicated conquerors preferred joining it to fighting it. The galaxy would continue to change, continue to grow, continue to face new challenges and opportunities. But it would face them together, as partners rather than enemies, as collaborators rather than competitors. And at the heart of it all was a simple human truth that had somehow taken the galaxy millions of years to discover. Cooperation creates more value than domination ever destroys. The age of empires was ending. The age of alliance had begun.